Hello, this is going to be video 6 of my lock design series, and I'm going to be looking at optimizing keying ratios. And I will warn you in advance, this one is probably going to be a little bit dry. I think it's important, useful stuff, but maybe not super exciting. But I'm just going to get right into it. So, bottom line up front, while maximizing time the attacker must spend opening a lock, we also want to maximize the number of unique keying permutations. Otherwise, we make an accidental, lucky, or brute force opens more likely. So we don't want to improve the security such that it makes it more difficult for an attacker, but it makes it really easy for somebody to, say, accidentally open the lock because there's not that many key permutations, and their key just happens to work in the lock. That's not an improvement in security. So where n is the number of bidding positions, and I'll use a key to sort of go over this some too. So n is the number of bidding positions. So like on a key, that might be from 0 to 9, how many different key heights you can have. And r is the number of tumblers. So like on this, we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That would be your tumblers. That can be your wheels, levers, discs, sliders, wafers, etc. Attackers who can perfectly interpret feedback can open the lock in NR attempts, but the number of unique keying permutations is n to the rth power. And I talk about that a little bit more, why I think that in the video 2. So if you want to follow back on or look at that closer, you can see why I say that in video 2. If there are no false gates and all the bidding positions are equally possible, the average time to check a tumbler is maximized when we maximize R and set n equal to 2. So what this is saying is if there's no false gates and all the bidding positions are equally possible, this could be a 0 as well as it's as likely to be a 0 as it is a 9. The average time to check this position is going to be maximized when we set it to 2, which is interesting for a given set of combinations. So if there's a total of, we would say 12 possible combinations, n times r is equal to 12. We're going to maximize the time spent looking for the proper combination or the correct combination when we set n equal to 2. So 2 times 6 positions, or 2 raised to the 6. This results in an attack taking on average 50% more time than the worst case scenario where we would maximize n or set r equal to 1. So in other words, if we took a lock and let's say it had 12 possible combinations as n and r in total, n times r is 12. If we set n is equal to 1, so there's only one tumbler, but it can have 12 possible positions, that is going to be weaker than a system where we have 2 possible positions or 2 possible key heights and 6 positions. And on average, if you were to take all of the locks with all their possible combinations, it would take 50% longer to test them if you do 2 possible key heights over 6 positions than it would if you just had 1 with all 12 in one spot. And that is assuming there's no false gates. If false gates are included and they're maximized, in the sense that every other position has a false gate that also pushes it to another tumbler, and I talk about that in another video as well, a little bit more about what that means. But estimates the time required to test a bidding, T sub n, and to transition between the tumblers, T sub f, determine what ratio between r and n is optimal. So once you add false gates, that statement above is not necessarily true. Well, technically it is true, but the statement above, in this case, when there's no false gates, T sub f goes to 0, so we maximize r and set n equal to 2, which is the same thing this one says. So it is the same statement, but with T sub f going to 0. But in this case, if the time to transition between tumblers because of a false gate is greater than the time it checks to take different positions on a given tumbler, then we would maximize n and set r equal to 2. And we have to set r equal to 2 because we have to have at least 2 tumblers for a false gate to be effective. If the time is the same, if you can go transition between the tumblers as quickly as you can lift them, or check the different positions on them, then any ratio results in the same amount of time on average. And if the time to switch between false gates is much smaller than the time to check the positions, then we maximize r and set n equal to 2. But regardless of the ratio, false gates will still increase the attacker time where r is greater than 1, or where we have more than one tumbler. So you're not going to go wrong by trying to add false gates. It's going to be helpful. Even if the ratio isn't optimized according to this, it will still increase the total time. So what are some major takeaways of that? The results are unintuitive. So even though we can get feedback sooner, on average, decoding all the tumblers is going to take longer. That's definitely, in my opinion, counterintuitive. And that's kind of why I got obsessed with it this afternoon. And it's a big statement. So if you look at the math and you say, hey, that's wrong, you did something wrong, please let me know and correct me, and I'll edit the video or swap it with the correct information. But so yeah, please correct me if I'm wrong there. But that's the takeaway I was getting there. So in reality, when assessing the security as nr and not n raised to the rth power, the feedback is not providing anything more useful to the attacker than telling them another position is incorrect. The same as testing the wrong king with a single tumbler. So if we had one big, I don't know, if this was one big tumbler that had different positions on it and we were checking them. And that's what I was actually originally imagining, like some sort of large cylinder with different positions you could check. Would that be more effective or less effective than if this were split into 2? And so what we're saying is that it is less effective than it being split into 2 if there's no false gates, which is strange. It's definitely not, in my opinion, intuitive. It's also good news, because this is also how we maximize the number of king permutations. So we prevent those get lucky or quick brute force attacks, say trying every possible key. And it's also how most digital passwords already work. So in Lock Design Video 3, I talk about preventing power analysis attacks and timing attacks. And one of the ways you do that is allocating a large enough memory. We could prevent those attacks, which is equivalent to making r equal to 1. This suggests that on average, a bitwise power analysis attack would still be slower than iterating through a set of memory addresses looking for like a memory address with the correct key or something stored in it. Or a memory address with a key which says, yes, you have reached the correct memory address. So what are some limitations and assumptions to everything I just said there too? So this is based on some assumptions. One of them is that learning a partial king is not a benefit, and that the full king is required for the lock to open or for there to be some sort of success. And this may not be true for all systems. For example, an encryption system may be compromised quicker if a partial key was acquired. And because of this, a system which prevents any feedback may be required. And that would be equivalent to setting r equal to 1, and you can see that Lock Design Video 3 for like electronics. But this is, more of an issue, I think, in encryption systems where there are issues where if you have somebody get a portion of the key, it makes it much faster for them to decode an entire message or to reverse engineer the remaining part of the key. So in that case, then the assumptions I've just made and the comments I've just made, you wouldn't really want to use those optimizations if losing a partial key is a security threat. And then each bidding / keying is equally possible, which for a given design, or that's another assumption that each bidding or king is equally possible, which for a given design or manufacturing reasons may not be true for all locks. You may not be able to go equally. It may not be equally possible to go from a 9 to a 0 because the manufacturing may not let you make that kind of that steep of a cut, or they may not want all zeros or all nines or things like that. So if there's a limited bidding possible, that's going to slightly affect the equations. And I mean, I shouldn't say slightly. Depending on the restrictions, it will affect the equations. Another assumption is that the attacker can perfectly interpret the feedback from the lock, which is most likely not true for most locks and attackers. We know obscuring feedback will make an attack harder in reality, and this can be reflected in equations by increasing T sub n, or the time to check each individual position. So, yeah, if we look at T sub n there, you would increase that, I guess, to reflect that. And then very last, I just put together a little cheat sheet that's got some of the equations so far and the ones that I've used. So this is the big one today that I used to calculate how long it would take on average to open a lock with some equal distribution of these kings. So if that looks wrong, please let me know. But yeah, so these are, I think some of these equations I already shared before, but this one will be new, which is saying an attacker that can perfectly interpret the feedback this is the average time it'll take them to open a lock with an equal distribution of possible kings. Right there, so that's just going to be, yeah. R is the number of tumblers. T sub n is going to be the time for an attacker to test one position. And number of possible biddings. Yeah. And then this, I think, is the other new one. And so this is saying an attacker perfectly interpreting the feedback. The average time to open a lock with equal distribution, so the same as this, but with maximum false gates. So this is saying every position that can have a false gate has one. And it's designed such that that false gate will lead you to another tumbler. Which is a big statement. That's a big assumption. But if you have that, then this becomes the new time to average attacker time. And that is attacker time, not, so that's going to be how long the attacker with this perfect feedback takes. It's not how long the average user or somebody, the get lucky time, that's sort of, and raised to the R times, T for the number of times to check a key or something like that. So that's going to be a much, much larger number there. But I guess that is the point. And also the sort of good news is that the same thing that maximizes the time for an attacker also maximizes this value here, which when I first started thinking about it, I really didn't think was going to be the case. And I thought there was going to be a conflict there, which would be it would be a big compromise. It would definitely limit the security available. So it's good that that's not the case, or at least it doesn't appear to be the case. But yeah, if anybody wants to do the math and finds that that's not the case, please let me know and correct me. This is sort of just what I've come up with this afternoon. I started thinking about it around lunch while we were driving to Food Lion, and it was one of those things I just couldn't get out of my head. It got stuck in my head, and next thing I know, I had other plans this afternoon, but I ended up spending quite a bit of time thinking about this. So if I missed something, please let me know. It's a new thought, but I think it's an interesting one to think about for sure. Yeah, I think that's all I got. Haven't picked a lot of locks lately. I did pick some yesterday for the first time in a while. I was kind of happy. I picked some master locks and a couple of American locks. And it's the first time I've just sat down and picked any in a while. It was kind of neat too. These were some old locks from a family member's house where they just sort of had some old locks left in a bottom drawer that they didn't even have the keys for. So grabbed them, and it was kind of neat. One of them, it looked like a really sort of cheap Chinese master knockoff, but it actually had a spool pin in it, which was kind of interesting. Anyways, that's all I've got. Thank you for watching. And any feedback, comments, questions, concerns, let me know in the comments below. And thank you.